My guest at this time is Deroy Murdock. He's a nationally syndicated columnist. You can find many of his writings at National Review online, and he's joined us a number of times leading up to Tuesday's midterm elections. That Tuesday is tomorrow. So this is Deroy's final case to be made for why he thinks Republicans ought to maintain or perhaps even grow their majorities in the House and Senate. And Deroy, thanks so much for being with us.
Greg, great to be with you.
A couple of weeks ago, we were talking, and you said the main argument that the Republicans just need to talk about here is the economy. Look where we've come in the past 2 years, and we just got another booming jobs report on Friday, 250,000 jobs, maintaining the lowest unemployment level in almost 50 years, while adding 200,000 to the workforce, wages rising at the fastest pace in a decade. Yet the President of the United States has decided that the caravan is his closing argument. At least it's getting a lot more attention than what he has to say at these rallies about the economy. So what do you make of the strategy?
Well, I know that the so-called caravan, or as I call it, the pedestrian invasion force, is obviously a very important issue. But I think that the GOP has basically a beautiful gift that's wrapped in gold foil, and we ought to be talking about that. In fact, I think the White House today is unveiling new sanctions against Iran. I'm all for new sanctions against Iran, but I think that could have waited till Wednesday. We should be talking about the economy today. That jobs report was spectacular. Economists expected 190,000 jobs. The actual number was 250,000. I thought that the unemployment rate might go up a little bit because when people start looking for work who have been unemployed, they suddenly get into the statistics that can push up the jobless number. That didn't happen. In fact, it stayed at 3.7. I believe Hispanic unemployment now is at a record low. Americans of Asian background, unemployment for them is at a record low. Black unemployment is a little bit higher than 5.9% where it was in May, which was a record low. It's now at 6.2. Unemployment for adult women is now at the level where it was, I believe, in 1953 under President Dwight David Eisenhower. So this is mind-blowing levels of prosperity and economic good health, and with that comes happiness and joy. This is wonderful news, and it's what every Republican candidate from the president, well, I guess he's not on the ballot, from senator all the way down to city council ought to be talking about. Republican leadership brings peace, brings prosperity, and brings joy to people across the country, and that's really what the GOP ought to be pushing right now.
What's your assessment of how your brethren in the media have handled this home stretch in terms of what they've covered and how they've covered it?
Oh, terribly as usual. No big surprise. I'll give you one example. There's no way you can control for this sort of thing, unfortunately, but we had that horrific massacre at that Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, I believe 2 Fridays ago. No, I think it's a week ago today. It all runs together, you know. But in any case, it was a horrible atrocity. I believe it was in fact, it was the worst attack on Jews in American history. The response to that was that somehow President Trump is to blame for this, even though the gunman is a critic of President Trump. He believes President Trump is controlled by the Jews, and therefore he's part of the problem. He went on Twitter to say, "I've never worn a Make America Great Again hat, nor would I ever." So this is a guy who doesn't like President Trump, and yet somehow President Trump is responsible for his behavior, even though this guy rejects President Trump. So that is insane. And, of course, all these people said, the president needs to unify us, bring us together, let us all heal. So he goes to Pittsburgh to meet with the rabbi at this synagogue and heal the survivors of this atrocity. Then they attack him for going there and say, "How dare you go there?" when they've been begging for him to heal the country. Had he not gone there, the people immediately would scream, "How come he hasn't gone there to heal the victims?" So no matter what the president does, these jackals in the old guard media will attack him mercilessly, nonstop, no matter what he does. And I think the way they behaved and handled that awful situation in Pittsburgh is just the most recent example of that.
You mentioned a moment ago you think the strongest argument for Republicans is the economy. The thing that really got the base fired up over the last month, of course, was the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and how many on the right and in the middle and maybe even a few on the left recoiled at how the Democrats treated Brett Kavanaugh when there was no corroborating evidence. We just got a report from the Senate Judiciary Committee confirming that they found no corroborating evidence. And in fact, we found a second accuser who now admits that she fabricated the accusation. It's not Dr. Ford. It's not Ramirez from Yale, but one of the others who claims that she was raped in the back of a car and so forth. So how much has been made of Kavanaugh here in the closing couple of weeks? And do you think that enough attention has been paid to that or not enough?
I think enough. Look, we all went through that awful experience for the better part of 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, that thing went on and on and on, and that was really the only issue in this country for about 14 to 21 days. And I think we all know the details. He's on the court, thank God. And as you say, the evidence shows that these people, at least some, Senate says no evidence to corroborate these charges. And you've got this other woman who just made it up. She said she wants attention. So she accuses this man of raping her. I hope she goes to jail for a long time. That is a really sick, disgusting, and awful thing to do to Kavanaugh as a man individually, to the Senate Judiciary Committee as an institution, and to the American people from coast to coast. So she really needs to spend some jail time to suffer for that horrible act. So I think people are familiar with the arguments, and they know that the Democrats behaved totally inappropriately. They could have had a very serious and interesting discussion about Brett Kavanaugh's, I think it's 306 court cases or court opinions that he wrote. And they could say, look, here are the 10 opinions that show why Brett Kavanaugh should be on the court. That's a perfectly legitimate argument. We could have had a very good debate about it. They could have educated people. Maybe they could have persuaded enough people that, no, this guy shouldn't be there. But instead, to paraphrase Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go lower. Or Eric Holder, when they go low, we kick them. That was their basic attitude. And they just resorted to the ugliest, nastiest lies possible in order to prevent Brett Kavanaugh from getting on the court. So the Democrats really abuse the country for that, and I think they should pay a serious price for that at the polls tomorrow.
We're talking with syndicated columnist Deroy Murdock. You can find virtually all of his writings over at National Review Online. And Deroy, it's pretty traditional for the party of the president to not do well in the midterm elections. We've only seen a couple of exceptions to that, including right after 9/11 and George W. Bush, for example. 4 years later is a much different story for that President Bush. What do you make of the Democratic intensity? We saw it in special elections. We saw it in statewide elections in New Jersey and Virginia last year. How big of a Democratic base turnout are you expecting here, basically due to revulsion towards the president?
Well, I think, unfortunately, that is a big factor. The Democrats have been energized pretty much since election night 2 years ago. They'd expected Hillary Clinton, the Duchess of Chappaqua, to rise to the throne of the White House, which supposedly she was born to serve, and that didn't work out. And they've been pretty much in a complete, foaming at the mouth situation ever since. I do know that the weather is supposed to be poor on the East Coast tomorrow. We're supposed to get a lot of rain, so I don't know if soft Democrats will stay home, and if Republicans are charged up and energized and go to the polls, that could make the difference. I think that right now it's bottom of the ninth, tied game. This could go in any direction, and anybody listening to sounds of our voices who's interested in seeing the Republicans maintain the House, keep the Senate, win governorships, needs to be knocking on doors, making phone calls, taking people to polls, and of course voting themselves. And I think that this can go in any direction, and it really will depend on how hard people work between now and when the polls close, making sure they show up and vote, and then getting as many people to the polls to vote Republican tomorrow as possible.
Deroy, you've made no secret of how you hope the midterm elections turn out. But from an objective perspective, go ahead and predict anything you want to on House, Senate, or governorships. But also from just your perspective, what's a good night for Republicans, what's a great night for Republicans, and what's a bad night?
Oh, that's a good question. I think ultimately when people go to the polls, if they think about where this economy is, that people are, in fact, almost everyone in this country is better off than we were 2 years ago, and dramatically so, that people are not going to say, well, the economy is growing, people are going back to work, the North Korean missiles are not flying. ISIS, which was a complete horror show 2 years ago, is now down to something literally they've gone to the size of Great Britain in terms of the area they controlled, to something the size of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Those are actual approximations of the property that they controlled then versus now. I find it hard to believe people will take all of that and say, you know what, we don't need that, and then vote for the Democrats to go backwards to the way we were suffering 2 years ago. So I think that will lead the GOP to hold on. I think a good night is if they maintain both houses. A great night is if they maintain both houses and pick up seats in the Senate. Certainly if they pick up seats in the House, that will be a huge, huge victory in actual terms and in moral terms. I think a bad night is if they lose either house, and a really bad night is if there's a big surprise and the Democrats take over the House and the Senate, in which case things are going to be really, really ugly in this country. So I think it's still possible for the GOP to hold on to the Senate, hold on to the House, and get some good governors in. And that really depends on people who are listening to us going out and doing everything they can in the next probably about 30 or so hours to make sure that there's as big a surprise, a pleasant surprise tomorrow night as there was 2 years ago tomorrow night.
Well, we'll be watching. Deroy, thanks so much for your insights. We'll talk to you soon.
Greg, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Deroy Murdock, syndicated columnist. You can find all of his writings over at National Review Online. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.